It's the birthday of one of the most beloved children's authors in the world. Join us as we learn more about her life and legacy. Welcome, listeners, to our history article for the month of August, and we're happy you joined us today. We are on day 2 of this article. We've been talking about Beatrix Potter, the beloved author and illustrator of one of the world's most famous children's books. It's called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Now, she was also known as a conservationist, and we learned a lot about the tale of Peter Rabbit, the character of Peter Rabbit, and about her childhood yesterday. But I'm joined here today by 2 great panelists. They decided to come back from yesterday. Who are they? I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, listeners. It's Gordon. I'm back again. I'll always come back to talk about Beatrix Potter, one of my favourite authors, and I have so many cherished memories of her books from my childhood. And I've even reread some of them in adulthood as well. And if you're at home and you're interested in going and getting one of these books, I can tell you that they're not going to cost you very much. They're very short. So if you want to try one of them, I would definitely encourage you to do that.
That's great, Gordon. And over to my left, I also have...
Hi, friends. My name's Peter. It's great to be back. And if you do get these books, they're great for kids. So if you have kids, or you have little nephews and nieces, they would love you to read these stories to them, and I'm sure it will help improve their English too.
That is a very good point, Peter. Well done. Well, I wanted to ask you both, what is something that you learned from yesterday that you would like to review for our listeners?
Well, I enjoyed us talking about just how talented Beatrix Potter was. We discussed how she was not only an author and illustrator for her children's books, but she had a real keen spirit for science, and she illustrated plants and flowers beautifully, and that are now getting recognized by the scientific community today.
That's great. What about you, Peter?
Yes, she was a Renaissance woman, which means she did many different things. And I really do enjoy her illustrations. They have this charm to them, and I enjoy illustrations myself, so I always just have admired her little drawings.
I think for me it was just learning about how her and her brother would go on these little holidays with their family, and they would catch these wild animals and put them in their menagerie. I don't know why, I just like the way that word runs off the tongue, menagerie. And that's the inspiration that she had for these illustrations. I loved yesterday, Gordon, how you mentioned about their clothing, just the combination of animal and human characteristics put together with these characters. They had cute little clothes on them. And just how she managed to combine her detail for what was around her, her environment, the flora and fauna, to also some human elements and personality. And so I think she was amazing how she managed to combine that and also make it relatable for children. She was a scientist, but she managed to be able to speak to children through her books.
Yeah, exactly. The actual words in the stories, the sentences are often very short and the words are very simple. They're just perfect for kids. They're very accurate. The sentences are great, but they're just so attractive to kids, and they really are something wonderful to read to young children.
Well, listeners, we're glad that you have returned to join us, or you're even tuning in with us right now. We're going to get started in our first reading for today, so I encourage you to turn to page 43 in your Advanced magazine or on your digital device, and we will begin today's reading on column 1.
Standing the test of time. Potter was urged to turn the charming illustrations and stories she wrote in letters to children into books. She wrote 23 in all, a body of work that has inspired plays, ballets, films, and an astonishing array of merchandise. Peter Rabbit is probably the most famous children's book in the world. It was published 113 years ago, so it's really withstood the test of time, said London. It has this revered status, where it's such a beloved book that it is shared by different generations. The parents and grandparents will share it with the next generation. It's been translated into 36 languages, so it's really known around the world.
Well, welcome back, listeners. If you're just joining us, we're talking about Beatrix Potter, and the article we're talking about is her 150th birthday, and we're learning about what she has done in her life. She is a beloved author and illustrator and conservationist. Now, we see in this first column for today's reading that we start out by saying, standing the test of time, and that's actually an idiom we have in our vocabulary focus. Gordon, could you share with us what does it mean to stand the test of time?
Well, if something stands the test of time, it's still popular or going strong after a very long time. So we have discussed that Beatrix Potter was a Victorian lady who was born in the 19th century, and the first book that she published, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, was published in 1902. So that's over 100 years ago, and it has stood the test of time, which means it's still read a lot nowadays, it's still loved nowadays, it's still popular.
Very good, yes. And we see here, as we enter the paragraph, that Beatrix herself, we learned yesterday that she would go into the countryside as a child. She would look at these animals. As she was an adult, she would even draw these animals in a lot of detail, meticulous detail. But we see that she was urged to do what, Peter?
Yeah, she was urged to take her illustrations and stories that she wrote in letters and turn them into children's books. And I'm going to bring us back to yesterday. She started as a botanical illustrator, but because she was a woman, she was not widely accepted into that profession. It wasn't open to her. So I think she diverted her interests and her talent into writing fun little stories for friends and family of these little animals and making drawings. And so that's where she poured her attention into.
Right, and she did a great job. We learned that she wrote a lot of books. Here it says she wrote 23 in all. I'm sure that has continued even beyond 23, but that these works have inspired plays, ballets, films, and an astonishing array of merchandise. And I think yesterday I mentioned as a child I grew up with plates and forks and cups with Beatrix Potter on it. I think, Gordon, you mentioned some other things, the merchandise.
Yeah, we see her wonderful little drawings on T-shirts and plenty of other things. I myself had a egg cup with Peter Rabbit on the side. And an egg cup is literally just a cup in which you put a hard-boiled egg. You may have your breakfast in it. And I remember having my breakfast in my Peter Rabbit egg cup when I was a child.
Yes, I forgot about that too. I have those as well at home.
I think we did too as well. And maybe for our Asian listeners, you can kind of think of Hello Kitty in a way, of how your home probably has some objects with Hello Kitty on it. Some people might be offended by this analogy, but it's true of merchandising that one of the ways she was so successful was just all the different amount of things people could have with Peter Rabbit on it, especially for little kids, because they really enjoyed that.
Yes, probably today it would have, come in pencil boxes and what do you call those, folders for your papers and things like that as well. Well, we also talked about this yesterday, but Peter Rabbit, the book, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, is probably the most famous children's book in the world. It was published 114 years ago, so it's really withstood the test of time. Now we go on to learn, Gordon, that it has a certain kind of status.
Yeah, the status is revered. And this means that it's held in reverence, which means it's honoured, it's respected, it's loved. And we've talked a lot about how well known these books are, and we really can't oversay that. They are just loved by so many people. So the book is really revered.
We see that it's beloved by different generations. It says the parents and grandparents will share it with the next generation, which is probably how we all came to know about it. Our parents have shared it with us and their parents before them. We learn, and we did mention this yesterday too, but it has been translated into 36 languages, so it's really known around the world. Do you remember the first time you were read a Beatrix Potter book?
I can't remember the first time I was read it. I've just got images in my brain of my early childhood, and I can see the little books and the beautiful drawings, and I've got an older sister, and the two of us like looking at them. So maybe even my sister was the first one to read it to me, because she's 3 years older, and the words really are that simple that if my sister, who's only 3 years older, probably would have been able to read it to me when I was little.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, it has to be too early for me to remember. But I always remember those books being in my home. And then just throughout school or throughout that time, I'd always get called Peter Rabbit once in a while as a nickname. Not so much because of Peter Rabbit, his character, but just because it's so well known that it's a pretty common thing to start calling someone.
I think that's quite a nice nickname.
It is.
Peter Rabbit.
I don't mind it.
That's like affectionate. Peter Rabbit's so popular.
Right.
Maybe we shouldn't start calling you that around the office.
Yeah, I don't know.
We'll try to hold back on that. Yeah, it's interesting just thinking about the books, because I don't have a clear memory either of actually being read to with Beatrix Potter, but it just being in my home, just being there. I do remember reading it to my younger brother and sisters, but for myself, it's just always been there on the bookshelf. So I think that just shows people, how much it is a part of people's childhood, their upbringing. So, and of course we mentioned the different merchandise as well. Well, we're going to learn in this next column right now just a little bit more about Beatrix's conservation work. And so let's look in your magazine, still on column 1, under the heading An Early Conservationist.
An early conservationist. Potter, who also made a mark on the world through her land conservation, always had a profound sense of independence, said London. In many ways, she was like Peter Rabbit, who defied his mother's instructions and ventured into a world of adventure and risk. She became an extremely important farmer and conservationist, London said. She retreated from London as soon as she started making some money on her books to the Lake District. And over the course of the rest of her life, she saved and preserved and passed on 15 farms and over 4,000 acres, she said. Into the 20th century, she began giving these tremendous gifts back to the country, and that really got the National Trust of England going. Potter's foresight lives on, agreed Smith. One of the extraordinary things about Beatrix Potter, even though she was born 150 years ago, was that she was stunningly modern. Her desire to be independent, her embracing of the natural world, she said. If you look at her life, she was about things that are of great value to us now.
Okay, thank you for that reading. And we're learning a little bit more about Beatrix Potter as it is her 150th birthday. And we've been learning about how she's been an author, an illustrator, and now a little bit more about her conservation work. Peter, what do we learn first about her here?
So she made a mark on the world through her land conservation. This term, make a mark on something, means to just have influence, something that has, again, withstood the test of time. If, let's say you are driving your car and you run into something when you're backing up or something, and it leaves a mark, that mark will stay there. If it doesn't leave a mark, then it's not a permanent thing.
Good. Okay, and here we learn that she's influenced the world through her land conservation. Gordon, what is land conservation?
Well, we did discuss a little bit yesterday that she moved to the Lake District, which is a beautiful part of England. And when she moved there, around 1905, she bought a farm. And with all the money she got from selling her books, she began buying more and more of the land there. And she wanted to keep the land like in its state as it was. So the Lake District has many farms, there's lots of sheep that roam on the hills, and there's lots of wild areas, nice woodlands, and she wanted to keep that natural beauty and the traditional way of farming going. So through her purchases of the farm, she encouraged the farmers to keep farming there at a time where there was a lot of pressure for the farming to stop. And the effect of that has been tremendous. The Lake District is still a beautiful place, and she really did buy an awful lot of it.
I know for myself, having seen the Lake District from afar, I haven't visited it personally, but seeing it in movies or documentaries, I know that that is definitely on my list of things to see if I were ever to go to England. Now, we learned that she also had a profound sense of independence. So when something is profound, here we're talking about the fact that it is very strong, okay? And here we learn in many ways that she was like Peter Rabbit, her character, who, Peter, you mentioned earlier, was very mischievous. He liked to do his own thing.
Yeah, he is a very independent little rabbit, and you can know this if you read the story because he has 3 sisters who are very obedient. In Chinese they're guai, but Peter Rabbit is not. So she has this sense of independence, and I think this started in her childhood. She and her brother were not... They spent a lot of time alone. They weren't around other kids. So I think as she grew up, she just continued to be a loner.
Right. Yes. And we go on here to see that Peter Rabbit himself defied his mother's instructions. Now, we don't know if Beatrix did that, but the character of Peter did do that. And he ventured into the world of adventure and risk. Well, what do we learn a little bit more about Beatrix, Gordon?
So the way that she's like Peter is that she leaves a home and goes and explores other places. And Beatrix grew up in London, and the Lake District is actually quite far away from London, and she would have been, it's a rural area, so she went and bought a house which is called Hilltop, and that would have been quite lonely for her. She would have had to be very independent, surviving. Obviously she had a lot of money by this time, but she set up a house in the Lake District, in this rural environment, and just like embraced that world, which is a world she saw as a child when she was taken there on holiday.
Well, and again, she's a single woman right now. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And she got married in 1913, but I think she moved to the Lake District in 1905. So
yeah, so this is, I think, very not normal for a person to do, and especially a woman who is unmarried to go off and do such independent things during this age of time.
Especially taking care of a farm. There's a lot of hard work involved in that, whether it's keeping up the fences, different digging, throughout the property. That's quite laborsome work.
Yeah, and she had to engage with a whole different kind of people. In those days, you couldn't travel very far. A lot of the people she would have met in the Lake District may have only gone to London once or twice in their life, and they would have looked upon her as a Londoner, and she had to go there and engage with the local people, and she lived there for the rest of her life. So she really did well, but she had this tough time being independent in a time when, as Peter said, women didn't do this kind of thing in the early 1900s.
Well, we see over the course of her life, or the rest of her life, that she was able to do a lot. Peter, what was she able to do?
Well, in the field of conservation, she was able to preserve and save 15 farms, and that's over 4,000 acres.
It's a lot of land, right? And we see that going into the 20th century, she actually began doing what, Gordon?
Well, she gave the land, these farms, to a relatively new organisation in England, which was the National Trust. And the National Trust still exists nowadays. It is one of the biggest interest groups in the UK. It was founded in 1895. And just to tell our listeners of how much of an influence Beatrix Potter had on the National Trust in Britain, when the National Trust was founded in 1895, they began with 4.5 acres of the small pot of Wales. And Beatrix, purchased, as Peter just said, 4,000 acres during her life. And slowly all of that land was given to the National Trust. And since then, the National Trust is this huge organisation that conserves houses and land all over Britain. And I looked it up, and there's now 700,000 acres that the National Trust conserve in Britain.
Well, so she really got it started.
She really did. That's the big thing she did here. She just kicked off this trust to really give it a purpose and give it so much land that it could really invest in.
And what do they use this land for nowadays?
So the big thing nowadays is obviously tourism. The Lake District is now a protected area. You can't build what you want there. These farms and the beautiful walls you can see on the pictures in the magazine on page 43, they're all kept the way they were. And people can go visit and you can walk around and just enjoy the wonderful countryside.
Right, so it's interesting that in this next sentence we see Potter's foresight lives on. So even today people can enjoy the property that she managed to save.
Yes, indeed, yeah, the land and the little houses. You can actually go to her own little farm called Hilltop in the Lake District. And I have been there. I went there in 2007. And it's humble, it's quite small. It's a small little farmhouse quite near Lake Windermere, which is a beautiful part of the Lake District.
Wow. Okay, so maybe our listeners are thinking they would like to go visit this place. They can check out more on that online, right?
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, we also see that one of the extraordinary things about Beatrix Potter, that even though she was born 150 years ago, she was stunningly modern. And I think that's something we've continued to talk about throughout these 2 days. What did she have a desire to do, Peter?
So she desired to be independent and really embrace the natural world. And we could see that in her choice to move to the countryside by herself, just to be in this beautiful land with the lakes and trees and various animals. Again, she grew up going to the countryside. She collected different animals with her brother that they would bring home and take care of in her home. So this is what she truly was passionate about. Yes, she did author many books, but behind it all was this love of nature, this love of animals.
And she really did help keep this land intact and the beauty of the land. Indeed,
yeah, she was, as we read here, just so modern. This is a period of British history where Britain is at the top of the world. They're world power. The Industrial Revolution has happened. Britain is the world leader in the economy, producing so much. And it's all about production and being the best. And she's concentrating on things that matter more, and maybe matter more to us now than the natural environment, and not just like merging all these farms together into one big one so it can be productive, but keeping the landscape how it was. And I know the British people are hugely grateful for the National Trust, but Beatrix for keeping the farms how they were and then selling them or giving them to the National Trust.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in our age we have already accomplished producing things, and we are very good at producing pollution. But it is not easy to maintain and conserve natural places. So this is great. And she really was forward-thinking. In my own state of Colorado, we have these beautiful, they're called open spaces. And we love when the government sets aside areas of land where nothing can be changed to that space, but we're allowed to go running in there or walking on little paths. And it really does just keep our natural land the way it is, and it stops the cities from spreading out further, because if there's land, we're going to build on it so we can profit by it. But this is a different way that we can profit by it.
So, listeners, perhaps this is good food for thought to think about how are we preserving our land for the future, thinking about our environment. And here Beatrix had a lot of foresight about that. Peter's sharing about what's happening in Colorado. I know we do the same in New Zealand, but maybe you can also think about how that is happening in your own piece of land where you are. And also just to think about what kind of legacy perhaps you'd like to leave for future generations as well. We really encourage you to share some of your insights with us. So please email us here at Studio Classroom, or you can contact us on Facebook as well. But we hope that you've learned a lot about Beatrix's life and the legacy that she has left behind with this beautiful land in the Lake District, or perhaps you even thinking about visiting there. But we hope that you can join us for day 3 tomorrow to learn a little bit more about her legacy. But until then, this is Amanda.
This is Gordon.
And this is Peter.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.